Hello, what time is it where you are right now? Type the hour in the comments.
It started with what I thought was just exhaustion, the kind of fatigue that comes from working too many 12-hour days and pretending you're fine, because the world won't stop spinning just because you're tired. But it wasn't burnout, and it wasn't just stress. It was something deeper, something that stuck around even after I cleared my calendar and stopped drinking coffee. I didn't want to admit it at first. Who wants to say out loud that their body is betraying them? But after I fainted in the parking lot outside the school where I was teaching, after waking up to a nurse gently patting my cheek and asking if I knew what year it was, I finally let them run the tests. The word treatment came up in the same breath as immediate and specialist. The doctor looked at me with that gentle, practiced tone, half compassion, half business, and told me that if I acted quickly, the prognosis was good, manageable even. But if I waited, if I hesitated or delayed because of money or logistics, or some foolish belief that it might go away on its own, the outcome would likely shift in a direction none of us wanted to consider. I nodded. I took the pamphlets. I told him I'd talk to my family, and for some ridiculous reason, I thought that would be the easiest part. I wasn't asking for a miracle. I wasn't asking for the whole amount. I had some savings, enough for one round, maybe two, but not enough for the ongoing medication or the out-of-state specialist my insurance didn't cover. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my mom, the one with the scratch in the center from where Tyler dropped his toy truck 30 years ago, and laying it out as calmly as I could. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I just explained the diagnosis, the options, the cost, and said I would cover as much as I could, but I needed help with the rest. She was quiet for a moment, eyes fixed on the sugar bowl like it might answer for her. Then she reached for her tea and said, with a tone as casual as if we were discussing the weather, "We're kind of tapped out right now, sweetie." Tapped out? She said it again when I didn't respond, like repetition might make it sound more reasonable, more empathetic. You know, with your father's recent dental surgery, and with everything going on with Tyler, it's just not a great time financially. I blinked. Once, twice. I waited for her to say she was joking, that of course they'd help me, that I was their daughter, and this was about my health. But nothing came, just a gentle sigh, and a mention of how strong I've always been. That one stung more than I expected, because it wasn't just a deflection, it was an accusation. Strong meant self-sufficient. Strong meant you don't ask for help. Strong meant don't make us uncomfortable by needing something. I left without saying much, drove back to my apartment and sat in the parking lot for almost an hour, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might offer some kind of guidance. Later that night, while scrolling on my phone through old photos, trying to remind myself that life had once felt normal, I saw a notification pop up, something tagged by my mother on Facebook. I clicked it. It was a blurry photo of my brother, grinning beside a mangled SUV with a caption that read, "Our poor Tyler, third car this year, but thank God he's okay. Some things matter more than money. Do they?" I read the comments. People sending prayers, virtual hugs, emojis I didn't have the energy to process. I read my mother's replies, each one filled with warmth and adoration for her son, who, by his own admission, had totaled the car because he was distracted by a song. She laughed it off in the comments. "Boys will be boys," she wrote. The following week, I sat in their house again, this time just long enough to pick up a few boxes of books I'd stored in the garage. My father wasn't home. My mother offered me lemonade I didn't want, and started talking about Tyler's breakthrough. Apparently, he'd been seeing a life coach, had big ideas, was thinking of leaving the city. "He just needs a change of scenery," she said. "He's always been so sensitive to energy. A different pace might be just what he needs." I nodded because I had no energy to argue. I nodded because I was afraid if I opened my mouth I might scream. And then, as I was reaching for the last box, I saw it, sitting half exposed under a stack of magazines on the entryway table, an envelope, thick and glossy, with a folded corner and a golden logo embossed at the top. I don't know what compelled me to touch it, but I did. I lifted the flap and pulled out a brochure. Real estate, oceanfront. A resort town I vaguely recognized from a summer trip 20 years ago. Luxury investment properties, it said. Turnkey vacation homes designed for a fresh start. I placed it back exactly where it was, not a single corner shifted out of place. I said goodbye. I smiled. I thanked her for the lemonade. And I drove home, windows down, letting the cold air hit my face like a warning. That night, I sat in bed and went over my finances again. I sold 2 pieces of furniture on Facebook Marketplace. I emailed my landlord about breaking the lease early, just in case. I filled a folder on my desktop with a name I'd never used before. And I started thinking, not about the treatment, not about the diagnosis, not even about what I'd lost, but about what I was willing to do for peace. Because when your own parents hand your future to someone else, not out of need, but out of preference, something in you changes. And it doesn't scream, it doesn't rage, it just begins to plan. And I was planning. Quietly, carefully, relentlessly. They announced it during brunch, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if gifting a second chance came standard with a mimosa and a plate of overcooked eggs. My father had made a toast, barely standing from his chair, raising his glass with the enthusiasm of a man who hated performing but loved being praised for doing it anyway, and said something along the lines of, "Here's to new beginnings, to letting go of the past, and to building a life worth waking up to." I remember looking at my plate, half a bagel, a smear of cream cheese, untouched fruit, and wondering if I'd misheard, if this was some abstract metaphor for spiritual renewal, something vague and harmless that would float over brunch and disappear with the coffee. But then my mother, eyes wide with orchestrated surprise and pride so thick it nearly curdled the air, slid a silver envelope across the table to my brother, who, in typical fashion, laughed before opening it. Like he already knew this was going to be good, like he always knew the world would spin to catch him when he tripped. Inside was a deed, or part of one, something about coastal zoning and joint ownership, and a gated community with private beach access. I didn't read the fine print, but I saw the name of the town in gold ink, the one from the brochure I'd spotted weeks earlier, the one I deliberately pretended not to remember when I drove home with my hands shaking against the wheel and my throat dry from all the words I hadn't said. My mother clapped her hands together like some delighted game show host and said, "We just thought, after everything, it might be good for you to have a place that's yours, a fresh start, somewhere you can just be." And Tyler, in all his infinite grace, nodded solemnly, like a man who'd endured great hardship, like a war hero finally recognized for his sacrifices, and mumbled something about how much it meant to him that they still believed in him, even after all the mishaps. As if those weren't DUIs and failed ventures and a habit of ghosting women who paid his rent. I smiled, not out of happiness or irony, but because I could feel the edges of something cold settling beneath my skin. Clarity, maybe, or whatever comes right before a final decision. I said congratulations. I said the place sounded beautiful. I even offered to help him pack when the time came. Though I had no intention of ever lifting a single bog, my parents beamed, relieved at my reaction, mistaking my stillness for support, misreading my quiet as love. It wasn't love, it was calculation. Over the next few days, I told them I was feeling better. I said the treatment plan was manageable, that I'd figured something out, that a friend from college had offered to connect me with a program that reduced the cost, and though it wasn't ideal, I'd make it work. My mom nodded, relieved that she wouldn't have to carry the discomfort of guilt any longer, and changed the subject within minutes to the logistics of transferring utilities and whether the homeowners association allowed dogs. I told her I was thinking of taking a short trip, maybe something low-key before the school year started again, maybe somewhere coastal. She didn't blink. What I didn't say was that I had already begun the process of liquidating what little I had. My antique mirror collection, which had taken years to build from estate sales and flea markets, was sold in 3 days. My books, the hardcover first editions, the signed copies, the ones that had notes scribbled in the margins from professors and long-gone friends, were packed into boxes and shipped to collectors across the country. I sold my car, told people I was switching to public transit to reduce stress and focus on my health. That wasn't a lie. I was reducing stress, just not in the way they thought. Late one night, when the city felt as quiet as I needed it to be, I logged into a legal site I'd bookmarked months before during a failed attempt at creating a will, and I began researching property disputes. I read about tax liens and homeowner clauses and obscure zoning conflicts. I made a list, nothing concrete, not yet, but a list nonetheless. Tyler had been handed a house, a beach house, on the edge of the same ocean I once stood beside, broke and sunburned and 23, while they paid for his second semester at business school and told me, gently but firmly, that graduate school in the arts wasn't a real plan. I didn't call them. I didn't ask why. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I just moved slower around them, like someone preserving energy, someone grateful to be invited into the warmth even though they were still wet from the storm. Every comment my mother made about Tyler's turnaround, every photo my father forwarded of construction updates on the deck, every group text with Pinterest links to beach decor. I responded to all of it with emojis, with the occasional "love this," with the kind of supportive detachment that made them think I had finally accepted my place in the family hierarchy. What they didn't realize, what they had never realized, was that I didn't need them to love me equally anymore. I just needed them to underestimate me long enough to finish what I was starting. On the night before Tyler was scheduled to move in, I stopped by my parents' place under the guise of dropping off a framed photo he'd left behind. My mother hugged me at the door, said I looked glowing, which was probably just her way of saying I'd lost weight, and invited me in for tea. I declined. I told her I had an early appointment. She didn't ask what for. Before I left, I asked what the address was, just out of curiosity. She gave it to me without hesitation. The name of the street was almost laughably cliché, something like Driftwood Lane or Coral Breeze Court. I memorized it, thanked her again, and walked back to my rideshare. With a smile so wide it made the driver ask if I'd just gotten engaged. Not quite, but something had begun, something real, something deliberate, and they had no idea. There was no ceremony to the decision, no final confrontation or explosive family dinner where I flipped a table or delivered a cinematic monologue, while everyone sat stunned, mouths open, forks hovering above plates. Instead, there was only the slow, silent tapering of my presence, the kind of quiet withdrawal that leaves people confused but not concerned, especially when they've grown accustomed to your reliability being so effortless that they never stop to consider what happens when it runs out. I didn't announce that I was stepping away, didn't declare that I needed space or that I was hurt or that their choices had left a hollow in me too wide to patch with small talk and holiday plans. I simply stopped replying. At first, it was just a delay in texting back. An hour instead of 5 minutes, a day instead of a moment. Then I started leaving messages unread, allowing them to pile up like untouched mail from a time before everything became digital and avoidable. My mother texted me 3 times in 1 week about a new outdoor sofa Tyler was considering for the beach house, complete with links and photos and an emoji-heavy suggestion that I help him choose since I always had such good taste. And I let all 3 messages sit in silence, watched as the read receipts eventually became the conversation. My father sent a PDF attachment of some financial article about retirement diversification, a thing he did whenever he wasn't sure how to ask if I was okay, and I didn't open it. Tyler, of course, didn't text at all. Within 10 days, I had unfollowed them all on social media, not blocked, because that would have looked hostile, but muted, hidden, erased from my daily line of sight, so that I could breathe without choking on the bright filtered joy of a family that didn't realize how effortlessly they had made me disposable. It was like clearing clutter from a room you didn't know had been making you claustrophobic. I cleaned digitally and emotionally, unsubscribed from their narratives, reclaimed the mental square footage they had occupied for years. And the strangest part was how easy it was. Not painless, not pleasant, but easy, like my body had been waiting for permission to stop trying. Of course, my absence didn't go unnoticed forever. It began with a voicemail from my mother, too chipper to be authentic, asking if I'd gotten her messages and reminding me that the family BBQ was coming up. Then came a more pointed follow-up 3 days later, her tone still measured but now laced with that familiar brand of maternal guilt that smelled like pot roast and sounded like a choir solo, equal parts love and manipulation. "I hope everything's all right," she said. "We're just a little worried. You've always had a tendency to withdraw when you're under stress. You don't have to go through things alone." The irony was so thick I nearly dropped my phone laughing. Alone was precisely what they had left me to be when I needed them most. And now that my silence had made them uncomfortable, suddenly the lone wolf routine was unacceptable. By the 3rd week, her concern spilled over into the public sphere. She posted a long emotional status update on Facebook about the pain of watching someone you love struggle and push you away, complete with vague references to daughters and mental health, and a photo of the 3 of us from some long-forgotten vacation, our smiles frozen in a time before I realized how deeply conditional their love had always been. Her friends flooded the comments with virtual hugs and sympathy and well-intentioned nonsense, and I sat on my couch, phone in hand, reading every word like a script I'd outgrown, letting the dissonance wash over me like rain hitting a windshield. And then came the message from Tyler. Not a call, not a voicemail, just a short, weirdly formal message sent through Instagram of all places. "Hey, Mom's been asking about you. Everything cool?" That was it. No punctuation, no emotion, like he was checking in on a coworker who'd missed a meeting. I didn't answer. I screenshotted it, stared at it for a full minute, and then deleted it. It wasn't worth a response. Nothing he could say would undo the fact that while I was pricing out medication and calculating how long I could delay a specialist visit without risking long-term damage, he was posing on a porch swing, beer in hand, calling it a hard-earned new chapter. But the moment that stayed with me, the moment that sealed something inside me, came on a Wednesday morning just after sunrise, when my mother sent me a photo that she clearly believed would melt my heart and pull me back into the fold. It was Tyler again, barefoot on the back deck of the beach house, holding a mug and grinning at the camera with hair still wet from the ocean, looking every bit the poster boy for second chances. The message read, "Fresh starts heal everything. Don't you agree?" I stared at that photo for so long I could hear my pulse in my ears. I studied the background, sun-bleached wood, a sliver of coastline, the curve of the horizon, and something clicked in my chest, not like a snap or a break, but a soft closing of a door I hadn't realized had been open this whole time. My reply, when I finally sent it, was only 3 words. "They really do." And that was the last message I ever sent her. From that day forward, I became a ghost, not out of malice, but out of necessity. There is a kind of survival that requires absence, a kind of healing that demands distance. I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't making a statement. I was simply reclaiming a life that had been slowly drained of its autonomy by people who claim love but only practice convenience. In my new silence, I found a clarity sharper than any confrontation could have offered. I wasn't disappearing because I was weak or damaged or fragile. I was disappearing because I had finally remembered how to exist without asking for permission. And while they scrambled to fill the silence with stories and theories and public empathy, I was already building something far more valuable than their attention. I was building an ending, or maybe a beginning, and they wouldn't even see it coming. It's funny how you can spend your whole life being the dependable one, the one who shows up on time, remembers birthdays, brings a backup charger to every family gathering, and always makes sure the people around you feel a little bit more stable just by standing quietly nearby. And then, almost overnight, you become someone else entirely, not by force or trauma or sudden epiphany, but by slow, calculated intention, by choosing, with precision and no theatrics, to shift your weight just slightly to the left, until no one knows where you went or when exactly you started moving. That's what it felt like when I stepped onto the plane bound for the Carolina coast. Quiet, calm, unhurried, like slipping through a doorway I'd always known was there, but had never dared to open. The town was smaller than I remembered, although that might have been the years talking, or the fact that I hadn't seen it through the eyes of someone seeking control. It smelled like salt and pine, and that specific kind of sun-warmed sand that always clings to the insides of your shoes, no matter how many times you shake them out. The air was thicker, lazier, but in that deceptive southern way that hides sharpness behind hospitality. I rented a modest room in a guest house run by a woman named Lorna, who asked no questions, made strong coffee, and had an encyclopedic knowledge of every city ordinance passed since the early 90s. I liked her immediately. For 3 days, I did nothing but walk the boardwalks, eat overpriced shrimp tacos, and pretend I was just another tourist passing through, though I avoided the beach house street entirely, as if proximity alone might alert the family that I was closer than I had any right to be. But on the 4th morning, I walked into a real estate office that advertised quiet exits and fast closings, where a woman with impeccable nails and a nameplate that read, Nicole Trainer, Relocation Specialist, asked if I was looking to sell, buy, or disappear. I told her maybe all three, and instead of laughing, she nodded like that made perfect sense. We talked for nearly an hour in a glass-walled office filled with soft lighting and motivational quotes about new beginnings. And though I didn't share much detail, I gave her enough to understand the stakes. I told her I was interested in setting up a legal presence in the area, maybe changing residency, maybe exploring property loopholes. Nothing shady, nothing illegal, just technicalities. She understood immediately. Coastal towns are full of gray areas, she said, filing her nails without looking up. People come here to start over, but most don't realize how vulnerable their so-called fresh starts actually are. I asked her if it was possible to monitor a property, one I wasn't on the deed for, and she smiled the way foxes must smile before they bite. Legally? No, strategically? Absolutely. What followed was a week of paperwork, long walks, and quiet phone calls made from beneath wide-brimmed hats. I rented a small mailbox through a private mail service using my new local address, which allowed me to establish residency for certain filings. I opened a checking account at a local credit union and used my updated address to register a small consulting business. Entirely real, entirely mine, under the name Blue Shore Strategies. The name didn't matter. The legitimacy did. With these steps in place, I began scanning public records and cross-referencing county tax filings, looking for anything that might give me leverage, anything overlooked in the giddy rush to claim paradise. And then I found it. Buried in a boring municipal PDF labeled Compliance Actions Pending Q1, there it was. A note about properties under review for failure to update occupancy status within the required window of acquisition. The clause was obscure, tucked into the back pages of a zoning ordinance last amended 7 years ago, and it stated, rather plainly, that any property transferred within the township must be formally registered as occupied by the deed holder within 60 days or face a reclassification for tax purposes, including possible fines, delayed title recognition, and, if uncorrected, local intervention via municipal enforcement. In short, Tyler had forgotten to submit a form, just a form, a simple signature, an official acknowledgement that he was, in fact, residing full-time in the gifted paradise he now bragged about online. And because my parents had pushed it all through with the speed of rich guilt and no follow-through, and because Tyler couldn't be bothered to read more than 2 paragraphs of anything that didn't feature a $sign or a cocktail recipe, it had gone undone. And now the house they bought, the house they photographed, the house they called a symbol of healing, was technically in violation. I brought the document to Nicole, who raised an eyebrow, ran a few checks, and smiled like she'd just found an old friend's name on a seating chart she wasn't supposed to see. "We can work with this," she said, "and if he wants to keep the property clean and clear, guess who he'll have to go through?" She handed me a business card, her personal cell scribbled on the back. "You just let me know when to start the clock." That night, I didn't sleep, not out of nerves or regret, but because I was high on the rush of subtle control, the electric thrill of knowing something they didn't, of holding a string that, if pulled, could unravel their entire pretty fiction of redemption and reward. I lay in bed with the window open, listening to the ocean hum like some ancient lullaby, and I imagined the look on my mother's face when the letter arrived. The moment she'd call Tyler in a panic, the unraveling that would begin, not with shouting or accusations, but with questions, confusion, and the creeping fear that someone out there was watching with more knowledge than they should have. And when that day came, I wouldn't scream, I wouldn't accuse, I wouldn't explain, I'd just let it happen. And no one, not Tyler, not Diane, not Carl, would ever suspect that the beginning of their unraveling had started with my silence, with a signature, and with a mailbox no one thought to question. The moment Tyler's world began to tilt was quieter than anyone expected, far from the dramatic confrontation or the explosive revelation that so many family dramas depend on to grab attention and sweep through the heart like a storm. Instead, it came in the form of a single phone call, the kind of call you don't answer when you've been waiting for it, but not for this reason. A call that buzzed across the surface of a carefully constructed calm like a sharp stone skipping on glass. And when I finally listened, his voice was thin with panic, brittle with disbelief, as he stammered through the realization that he had been locked out of the beach house, that the doors were literally sealed against him not by force or violence, but by the dry, unforgiving language of municipal law and unpaid tax notices that had slipped through his grasp like sand. I didn't answer that call right away. I let it ring through to voicemail, a deliberate choice wrapped in layers of quiet satisfaction and cold resolve, knowing that the power in this moment was mine alone to wield, not with threats or shouts, but with absence, with the calculated withdrawal of my own presence from their world of entitled expectations and assumed forgiveness. When I finally returned his message, my voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to gain by silence and distance. I reminded him subtly that property laws weren't favors granted at whim, that ownership came with responsibility, that fresh starts sometimes required accountability, things I had once begged for but was told I was too much trouble to ask. When my mother finally called, the tremor in her voice was unmistakable, not a cry for help, but a desperate grasp for answers, for a way to untangle the mess they had overlooked in their rush to paint Tyler as the prodigal son redeemed by a coastal getaway and a fresh horizon. "What did you do?" she demanded, her words sharp yet laced with disbelief, as if she expected me to confess to some grand theft or an act of vengeance, something loud and visible, something that could be undone by a simple apology or family meeting. But I told her nothing, only offered that sometimes the smallest actions speak the loudest truths, and that disappearing doesn't always mean running away. It can mean stepping into the space you were always meant to claim, even if no one noticed you needed it until you were gone. I never returned to their calls or messages after that day. I didn't make a public announcement or dramatic exit. I simply became a shadow in their lives, a quiet absence that slowly rewrote the family narrative in subtle, irrevocable ways. Instead of confrontation, I chose patience and precision, allowing the legal mechanisms I had set in motion to do the work that anger and shouting never could. The house remained unoccupied by Tyler for weeks. Tax notices piled up, enforcement letters followed, and the local municipality began the slow but inevitable process of reclaiming what was neglected, what was abandoned, not by accident, but by design. Meanwhile, I found solace on that very porch I had once only seen in photographs, sitting beneath the shade of a sprawling oak, a glass of wine in hand, and a laptop open on my knees, the glow of the screen illuminating a future I was finally building for myself. The ocean stretched out beyond the railing, vast and steady, a reminder that some tides never wait for permission to turn, that change can come quietly and relentlessly, reshaping the shore without fanfare or notice. In those moments, I understood that my disappearance was not an erasure, but a reclamation, a silent yet powerful assertion of agency that spoke louder than any argument or demand ever could. The last thing I ever said to them was in a text message sent months before that first phone call. Simple and loaded with meaning. They really do. I never elaborated, never explained, leaving the words hanging in the air like a question without an answer, a final puzzle piece that no one would solve. That ambiguity was my gift and my shield, the space where justice and revenge blurred into one, where love and betrayal tangled until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. And as I watched their world unravel from a distance, safe and silent, I knew that sometimes the most profound acts of defiance are the ones that go unnoticed, the ones carried out not with noise or fury, but with quiet, unshakable resolve. This was my story, my escape, my revenge. A tale told not in raised voices or broken bonds, but in the slow, deliberate reclaiming of everything I had been denied, the quiet disappearance that became the loudest statement of all.